Good morning, everyone. My name is Goran Živković. I teach Old Testament at Theologische Hochschule Friedrichshain in Germany, and today I will be presiding over this session. We have three amazing papers here, and we will have 15 minutes the paper, followed by 5 minutes for Q&A. So our first paper today is by L.S. Baker Jr., archaeologist and associate director of Andrews University Press, and Arnie Lou S. Baker, family nurse practitioner. The title of their paper is Ancient Egyptian Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder and the Exodus Remedy.
Good morning. The Exodus event was an intentionally trauma-inducing, paradigm-shifting upheaval in the lives of everyone who lived through it. This was a necessary stress event with eternal consequences. This classification can be deduced because the plagues were not required in order to secure the release of the Hebrews. After all, a God who can send 10 plagues one at a time could send all the plagues at one time. In fact, a God who can send these types of plagues didn't actually need to send any plagues at all to secure the release of his people, if that were his aim in sending the plagues on Egypt. In reality, there would have been nothing the Egyptians could have done to stop him. Rather, the plagues on Egypt served a purpose different than and disconnected from the issue of the release of the Hebrews from their captivity in Egypt. That purpose is demonstrably tied to intentional, paradigm-shifting, worldview-upsetting trauma and the necessary restoration of purposely broken people in the remedy that followed in the Exodus event. While there were 10 plagues, Moses is described as having 12 encounters with Pharaoh, the first 2 prior to the plagues. A close examination of these encounters reveals a pattern of subtle communication that increased in intensity and devastation from the first encounter to the 12th. This subtle communication was not just between God and Pharaoh, but between God and the people in Egypt, Egyptian, Hebrew, and other foreigners. In Exodus 6:1 through 7:7, God revealed the real purpose for the plagues, which had a twofold purpose. The first, the plagues were designed to provide the evidence for the faith the Hebrews would need moving forward, Exodus 6-8, a beautiful revelation of the character of God and his requirements for his people. Second, the plagues were designed to illustrate to the Egyptians the nature of a true God, Exodus 7:3-5. The gods in ancient Egypt, as in all ancient cultures, were unfeeling, unresponsive, and distant. While not included in Exodus 6:1 through 7:7, a third purpose becomes clear through careful analysis of whose hand was active in each of the plagues. Thus, God through the plagues would show Moses that he was able to use Moses' blood-stained, guilty hand to accomplish the work of God, not because of Moses' hand, but because Moses would learn to lift God's hand when doing God's work. Thus, the purpose of the plagues was not liberation, but rather education. The Hebrews had to be educated in faith, the Egyptians had to be educated in the nature of God, and God's leader Moses had to be educated regarding who really brought success in God's work. In this paper, we are concerned mostly with the Egyptian experience as it relates to evangelism, since in evangelistic efforts, the first work is primarily in educating regarding the nature of God. This education is necessarily a radical paradigm shift. The Egyptians who left Egypt with the Hebrews no doubt held the common Egyptian concept of the divine. The Egyptians believed that the God desired humanity to work in partnership with them to maintain balance, called Ma'at. The first 2 encounters prior to the plague were designed to introduce God to the Egyptians. It was a commonly held belief among nearly all peoples in the ancient Near East that gods were territorial. To illustrate that God was present in Egypt and more mighty than all other gods, God condescended to use Egyptian mythology in the second encounter around the serpent. The first 3 plagues, the next 3 encounters, served as irritations, as God's authority regarding abundance or lack was established. The next 3 plagues were harmful, as God established his superiority through health and wellness. The next 3 plagues were destructive, as God's power was established over the infrastructure of Egypt, primarily agricultural and architectural, However, the most devastating plague of all was the darkness of Plague 9, which directly targeted the most fundamental aspect of their religion, the regular rebirth of the sun each morning. By the sun going dark and staying that way, the forces of darkness would have seemed to have won. Not knowing this would only last 3 days, would have turned the belief system of the Egyptians upside down, and thus the ninth plague would have rocked every single Egyptian to the very core. The last plague was almost certainly considered to be the first of 3 by the Egyptians, just as all others had been. It was death itself, as the dominion of God over the future of every family was established. It is through the words of the Egyptians themselves revealing their mental state as they voiced their fear that if the Hebrews did not leave, the next plague would be their death, Exodus 12:33. They probably believed that if there would be an 11th plague, all the Egyptians would be dead. We can see that in this sentiment that they were aware of a 5-fold progressive nature of the encounters: warning, irritation, harm, destruction, death. In addition, they also seem to recognize the tripart grouping of the plagues themselves. Throughout the course of these few months, not only had their deities been proven impotent, but their lives had been turned upside down. In the paper, we take you through each of the plagues and the phenomenology. Thus, the 10 plagues took a devastating toll on the Egyptians, not just physically and spiritually, but quite clearly mentally as well. But this was by design. That the Egyptians dealt with some sort of mental trauma is without question. The reason and the remedy are more in question.
The emotional toll the plagues took on the Egyptians seemed clearly to have been intentionally world-changing. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, witnessing traumatic events, such as a natural disaster, act of violence, or serious accident is termed post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. It is hard to suppose that the plagues would not qualify because those who experience a traumatic event often cannot stop thinking about what has happened. People who have PTSD may continue to feel stressed or frightened, even though they are not in danger. This physical, emotional, or mental harm is replayed, and the fear remains that it might happen again. In addition to fear, the body defends itself physically or mentally with pain, distress, distrust, and loss as defense mechanisms. A characteristic of ancient Egyptian medicine is its desire to restore balance through various remedies, all of which particularly highlighting the idea of community and communication. Ma'at was a goddess associated with balance. It appears that she was the governing paradigm over all medicinal thought. Restoring balance, i.e. Ma'at, was accomplished largely through obedience to the gods and through maintaining the proper relationships between the communities. It is important to note that this was not a mechanistic relationship where the gods were compelled to respond favorably, but to secure the favor of the gods, the healers sought to provide the best situation in which the gods were more likely than not to respond. Ancient people sought assistance from their deities and found comfort in their religion when dealing with trauma. Is it possible that God had a remedy for the mental trauma he intentionally caused that was religious in nature? And would his remedy be recognized in modern medical studies? Mental trauma can be healed. Modern research shows that this happens best through the building of relationships in a community. Many diverse philosophical theories converge upon the same fundamental insight that the social or interpersonal realm is a central element of human nature. This is implicit in any consideration of mental disorders, mental health, and psychological well-being. As human beings, we can be individual agents acting independently as well as group members acting interdependently. In other words, people were made to be around people and be healed with people. An 80-year-old Harvard study of adult development led by Robert Waldinger discovered that close relationships and social connections are crucial for our well-being as we age. Having supportive and nurturing relationships is a buffer against life's stresses and protects overall health. Good relationships keep us healthier and happier. Those with robust social connections showed lower rates of diabetes, arthritis, cognitive decline, and other chronic conditions. led the researchers to hypothesize that close relationships act as stress regulators, helping our bodies calm down and return to equilibrium following challenging events. Adults are usually the focus of these sorts of studies, but children also experience mental trauma and need healing. Psychiatrist Bruce Perry discovered that medications and therapies are not enough to promote healing and recovery in children who experience trauma. Children will not heal fully without lasting, caring connections with others. He discovered that children also need a strong social network and support that is tolerant of their weaknesses and vulnerabilities, and that is patient with them as they slowly build new skills. This he characterized as consistent, patient, repetitive, loving care. Because humans are inescapably social beings, the worst catastrophes that can befall us inevitably involve relational loss. As a result, recovery from trauma and neglect is also all about relationships, building trust, regaining confidence, returning to a sense of security, and reconnecting to love. One avenue of cultivating our relationships is through our focused attention. Without the curiosity of others, we miss the opportunity to understand and be empathetic. It seems that too often the busy lifestyle most of the world experiences daily leads those around us who are suffering from mental trauma to be unintentionally marginalized and not receive the healing they need simply because we don't have the time to focus on them as people. This rationalization has led to the conclusion that negative post-trauma cognitions warrant further investigation as a potential mechanism by which social support influences PTSD. This potential mediating role may be more relevant for the presence of negative social interaction than the absence of positive social interaction. For as those who have suffered significant mental trauma find themselves in a negative social support environment, their PTSD worsens. On the other hand, positive social support environments greatly reduce PTSD, and in many cases, it disappears altogether. The bottom line is that people need to know that they matter, and this happens in community.
The ancient Egyptians, like many people in the ancient world, considered the deity who sent and caused the illness would also need to be the one responsible for remedying it. It appears that God used this concept to draw the Egyptians to him. The remedy God offered was for all to become part of the community of believers. Foreigners were to accept circumcision and join the community of faith by fully participating through obedience to God's direction, Exodus 12:48-49. This may explain the purpose for the location of the instructions regarding Passover and Feast of Unleavened Bread, and instructions of the firstborn, Exodus 12:43-13:16, that interrupts the Exodus narrative. Becoming part of the community not only allowed them to participate in their religious rituals, but as recognized in modern medicinal analysis, would also have healed their mental trauma by providing relationships both with God and with other people. Evangelism also is an intentionally paradigm-shifting activity. The entire purpose of evangelism is to lead people away from their formerly held worldview toward a new way of thinking by seeing the cosmic conflict either for the first time or in a clearer way. Some were not even aware that there is a cosmic conflict, and then suddenly over the course of a relatively short time in their lives, they come to learn about evil and good angels battling it out in the room where they live. Diet, activities, social circles, lifestyle, spiritual beliefs, and many other parts of their lives change dramatically and in rapid succession. It is important for those conducting evangelism, which should be everybody, to realize that those who are leading to God, are experiencing some very dramatic and sometimes very traumatic, life-changing decisions, some of which can rapidly change their relationships to lifelong friends or even family relations. As a result of the analysis of the ancient Egyptians who left Egypt in the Exodus event, it seems clear that the remedy God had in mind for the Egyptians suffering almost certainly from PTSD is the same remedy we need to be sure to extend to those involved in accepting God and major changes in their lives as a result of evangelistic efforts. This primarily includes community and the relationships formed as a result.
Further, lack of positive community support following a serious mental trauma experience does result in further strengthening the PTSD. This negative environment does great harm to new converts. It should not be surprising to find that humans made in the image of God, Genesis 1:26-28, are meant to connect with each other in the way God connects with himself as the triune God. We are also meant to connect with God through worship and diligently seeking him, Hebrews 11:6. Thus, when we engage in evangelism, we must provide the necessary positive community building structure to help those who have been broken necessarily to heal quickly and healthily. This appears to happen best when they are made to feel that they matter. They will heal as they continue to learn more about the God they have decided to follow, and their relationship with him grows ever stronger. All of this is part of the responsibility of the church as the body of Christ. 1 Corinthians 12:27.